Hello, and welcome to the Facility Resilience Podcast, where we cover all things facility design, operation, and maintenance, in addition to business continuity and resilience strategies. I'm your host, Jennifer Getz, and today I'm joined by Brad Stevens, the Vice President of IoT and Platform Sales with Wesco. With over 3 decades of experience in the industry, Brad is recognized for his strategic vision and leadership in sales operations and global technology solutions. Brad, thank you so much for joining us on this episode today.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm really excited to talk to you and all the people out there.
I'm excited to talk to you too, especially since we're talking about what facility executives need to know about the IoT and OT convergence. We've heard and seen a lot about the IT-OT convergence happening, and these are two seemingly different teams within an organization with seemingly competing internal goals. So Brad, how can organizations successfully bridge the gap between IT and OT teams?
No, that's a great question. And again, I think we're finally striking a nerve to where both IT and OT really are converging. There's been a lot of talk about it out there. As you said, I've been around 30 years and I've seen a lot of the different organizations kind of converge together, like IT and the phone systems, right? You know, IT and security, they're all starting to work together. I mean, there's no reason why IT and OT shouldn't work together. So I think it's finally starting to happen, but ultimately, you have to bridge the gap. You have to get them working together. I think there's probably a few ways that I think we could get this accomplished. I mean, again, I think you have to first acknowledge the gap, right? The culture gap, right? I mean, IT speaks bandwidth and firewalls and uptime, right? I mean, OT speaks chillers and schedules and operational reliability. So, there's a little bit different in the conversations and how they do it, but we're going to get them working together. You can really start this by doing cross-functionality. Pull each of these teams together and put them in some disciplines or joint projects to work together. I think that always really kind of gets to start to get just the cultural, the personal, everything working together. Then you really kind of as an organization start to do shared KPIs, around uptime or energy reduction, security compliance, tenant satisfaction. I can think of a lot of things, reduction in operational expenses, a lot of these things that both organizations care about. It's just a matter of to share some of those goals. And then ultimately, I think when you do kind of do that and you start to implement kind of a system that they're both operating on, it kind of makes them use it together. You can have a unified system that both groups are working on, but still goes after each other's internal KPIs and all that side. So around IT, keeping cyber secure and all the other things, as well as operations being operational efficient. So, sharing this data and analytics underneath one system will allow them to share in their success. And ultimately, I would just frame IT-OT convergence as not a threat to anybody's role, but kind of a force multiplier.
Yeah. What is driving the IT/OT convergence in your opinion? And how does this unified system ultimately simplify operations?
I could probably think of 2 or 3. I mean, I think one area is just, operational efficiency pressures out there. I mean, I think seems like everybody's being asked to do more with less. Building owners, facility managers, data center managers, they're not immune to this, right? They're being asked to do the same thing, right? So I think that's definitely one that's kind of driving some of this convergence and working together. For sure, as I mentioned, think of cybersecurity, right? And compliance demands. I mean, you've got all these disparate systems along with multiple, devices have been put on the network, whether that's sensors, cameras, all in the last few years. Everything is becoming smart. Everything is getting put on the network and they're getting connected to the network at a blistering pace. So these are creating blind spots, right? And risk for both IT for sure, but also OT. I think cybersecurity one is for sure. And then I think honestly, the biggest driver out there is just everybody is on this road of digital transformation, right? And I think your large organizations out there, everything from your hospitals to your school districts as well, are doing some type of digital transformation. And there's expectations with that, right? And it seems like everyone's in the middle of it. That's a great thing, but leadership doesn't just want data aggregated or something like that. They want actionable data across all these systems. If you're going to transform it, you're going to have to go do some kind of actions. And unfortunately, the data is in a number of disparate solutions and silos across the organization. So you're going to have to find a unified system to really break down these silos between facilities and IT and building automation. If you do, that enable, shared data models across disparate systems like HVAC and lighting and access control and energy. You'll start to get centralized visibility and control from the boardroom. Now your executives can start to see this information, but also, the boiler room guy can see it too, right? That's to me some of the big things. I think you'll also see, I think it addresses kind of the reduction, that burden and honestly the reduced support. So one system that can connect data, collect it, analyze it, and then ultimately allow people to act on it instead of multiple systems, right? That's a huge opportunity for our customers today. So I think that's kind of what's driving it and ultimately the need for one system to kind of look at everything.
I've been seeing similar issues as well, that people have more responsibility than ever and more things to oversee, especially with diverse systems being integrated. So this approach to a more unified system seems across the board when I've been talking to facility executives.
I laugh. I mean, I think I've maybe shared this with some of your readers in the past, but at the end of the day, I laugh. I mean, I'm the facility manager of my own house, right? And I sit there and look at my own house and how many smart devices have come into my house in the last 5 years. I'm what we're just talking about and all you guys are doing. I mean, I'm always only doing it in my house. I'm not doing it across a corporate footprint across 100 buildings. But I mean, my HVAC's smart, my sprinkler system's smart, my lights are smart, my garage door is smart. I mean, and they're all on different systems, different GUI interfaces. They're not talking to each other. I mean, it's a problem for an older guy like me, right? Trying to figure out how to go do this stuff, right? So I can't imagine, what the facility manager and the data center manager are trying to do across footprint like they have with all these disparate systems out there. So it's a challenge, but I think it's one your readers are really looking at a way to try and manage through, kind of some type of unified system.
Absolutely. And with trying to put these unified systems and putting them all together, what are some issues that organizations might face as they're undergoing this process?
I don't know if I call them issues. I might call it a mild change, right? I don't want it to be sound like it's a massive issue, right? But there is some change, right? Some change management that would have to do. But if you start to look at kind of going to a unified system, you absolutely have to look at one thing, which is just incompatible data naming schemes that are out there, right? I mean, you've got one building, someone might call it a chiller, the next one might call it a cooling plant A, right? I mean, this makes it really impossible, really ultimately to kind of start aggregating that data into one system. So one issue out there that they face is just everyone's got all these different items out there and they're calling it different things. It's very hard to aggregate that data and then do something with it. So putting in a proper naming scheme, allows you to normalize the data. Ultimately, like I said, call it the same thing. It's a mild change for a facility manager, but it should be put in place to incorporate true unified system out there. I think another change that they're seeing is an issue out there that, there's the silos of operations and data, right? So with disparate systems, you get siloed operating systems. So you got one person out there that knows how to work this item and then one that knows how to do this one. You really start to look at, legacy systems really weren't designed to kind of share data. So not sharing meant proprietary systems and more people to go do this. This operational knowledge out there and documentation needs to be unified under one system with leveraged resources. So that is something that they'll have to look at changing, and one of the issues out there. And then ultimately it's the simplest but the hardest one. I really think one of the big challenges out there is just fear of disruption. Ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Mentality is still being out there and practiced in many facilities. But as we mentioned, right, IT/OT is on this convergence, digital transformations happening. I mean, we should not put our heads in the sand and do nothing. We ultimately should embrace this technology and embrace it with technology that makes people more efficient and saves money and keeps people safer, et cetera.
I've definitely heard that mindset as well, where I've seen more interest in how do we update our legacy systems when you're trying to bring data together. So do you foresee this redefining how HVAC or lighting systems are designed and even managed and secured across commercial and industrial environments?
We're for sure seeing a move from, like we just talked about, isolated equipment design to, integrated, IP-enabled addressable systems that are ultimately expected to talk to each other. And I would say talk to each other out of the box, not have to go pay for hundreds of thousands of dollars for some kind of implementation or integration out there, right? So we're seeing that move there. So I think the way systems are being designed, I think control systems are now part of the building and network infrastructure. They've got to be designed with an IT standards thing in mind, like VLANs and all that. So we're seeing that design change already happening. This changes ultimately the role of the mechanical engineer and the installer and the facility manager. who all need to collaborate with IT. So I think, again, like I said, it's not only changing the design, but it's changing the way things are managed. And then ultimately a unified system it'll help all these groups really collaborate. When I say all the groups, from the engineer to the installer, to the facility man, to the executive people, it'll allow all these groups to collaborate. But, we'll really simplify the management of the system itself and bring, again, greater efficiencies and savings and network security to the organization.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot with organizations having to deal with different silos and how a unified system can really bring everybody together and making the data more simplified. So if you have to present things to executives and you get a better picture of your building health overall.
Yeah. I go back to my example of my house. I mean, my wife's the IT and I'm the OT. We get together, we get along really, really good now that we start working together on one system instead of complaining about 10 different systems. So I definitely think it starts to work when these groups start working together on one system for sure.
Oh, it's so true. I mean, you catch the redundancies, you see where you could utilize information that could apply in different areas. Now, I'd like to focus on how these systems are implemented and how can organizations start to harmonize data from multiple technologies. So thinking sensors, cameras, et cetera, across all different kind of building sites.
As we've been discussing, right, that typical facility has a number of disparate systems out there and a number of devices, right, all talking different languages and protocols, right? So if you ultimately want to harmonize this data, like you were saying, I mean, it's really harmonizing is really just basically aggregating the data and with some normalcy to it, like we talked about earlier, then you ultimately got to find a unified system that it really needs to be, protocol agnostic, right? I mean, like a lot of these disparate systems talk languages that, aren't out there as much anymore. Things talk MQTT and SNMP. I mean, just all these different protocols. You really need a unified system that's open and protocol agnostic, right? You gotta find one that's capable of normalizing, like we said, that data into a consistent model. And then, that one system has to be scalable. A lot of the customers out there aren't just, one city, one building, right? These are multi-organizations that are across countries, right? So you got to find a system that's scalable across, sites globally and adaptable to all of the legacy systems out there, not just a couple. I think another one is as you begin to kind of actually implement these unified systems, I mean, the easiest way for sure is just kind of do a phased implementation, right? You start with, a use case around some high value or what your CEO is trying to drive out there, what the company goals are, right? But, find a use case of high value that is in the facilities area and ultimately prove cost avoidance and do a return on investment. And then to me, it's really, you find that one use case, you do a great job with it, then you expand that use case across your whole portfolio. And then after that, hey, you find the next high value system or use case and move on in the same process from an implementation. I would say, just because of my background, you mentioned I've been for 30 years, been in the industry for 30 years. A lot of that was with Wesco and Anixter around, and a lot of my background was infrastructure. So I would be dismayed if I didn't make sure, hey, this is cool and this software, these unified systems are really, really cool and they are much, much needed out there. But, we can't forget about the infrastructure when you look to implement some unified system, right? I mean, these unified systems need a robust infrastructure, whether that's wired, wireless, or cellular, right? These different sensors, different devices are speaking different languages, but they're also talking to a different infrastructure depending on where that device is. If it's out on a cell tower, is it out in the middle of nowhere, or is it inside the walls of the building? But you got to have a robust infrastructure out there. And I honestly think of this whole experience as an infrastructure consolidation, right? It's not about replacing all these disparate systems and every device out there. It's really just creating a single pane of glass across your organization's infrastructure, ultimately to allow the corporations and the people to, work more efficiently, make more money, and be safer, right?
Yeah. With everything we've discussed, Brad, from the infrastructure that's going to be needed to bring all these different systems together. So some of our facility executives might be on different journeys when it comes to the IT/OT convergence. So I'm curious, what is some advice you might have for facility executives right now at this stage on how to navigate change management within their organizations? So either from the infrastructure side of how to start integrating that, or from the people side and how teams can collaborate more.
No, it's a great question, right? The hardest part about convergence isn't the technology a lot of times, it's the people, right? So, people must be willing to change or be led down the path of change, right? This change has to make sense and ultimately make the facility manager's role easier. So yeah, I think you have to kind of go do that first, kind of look at the individuals and make sure that everyone understands what that strategy is. But ultimately, change management, the best way to enable it is for facility leaders, right, to create shared goals. Find a use case between IT and OT that you can ultimately share in what that goal is. And like I mentioned before, whether that's uptime, energy saving, space utilization, right? I could think of a ton of them out there. That shared goal that you guys work together on, and then ultimately communicate at every level, from the technician to the executive. You set realistic goals for real world impact. You give people great visuals, and then ultimately you invest in training. I mean, there's one thing I've learned in my 30 years again here is it's great. You can read everything about it, but to sit down with somebody that's been around a long time, that's been there and done that and is willing to embrace this change and is there to help you train IT and OT people how to be familiar with some of these traditional systems as well as the newer systems, right? You got to have that exposure to training. Again, staunch advocate of just not dropping something off and saying, go read about it, right? You just have to have people trained on this stuff or they just never will change. So successful change management, the effort often start with a small pilot that delivers a measurable result. But at the end of the day, you're going to want to find something that is impactful to the organization. And I've seen in the past, you give somebody a very intuitive, very easy to manage, visual interface with some flexibility to grow. I think that growth turns into positive change management out there.
Brad, thank you so much for this conversation today. I learned a lot more about the IT/OT convergence. Just want to thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you to Wesco for sponsoring this podcast. And of course, thank you to our audience for listening. Please stay tuned for the next episode of Facility Resilience.